The iPhone 13 Pro has been available to filmmakers and video content creators alike for months. We've truly seen people make amazing content with this cinematic smartphone. But is the iPhone 13 Pro truly pro enough for filmmakers? I think it could be. Let me explain. When the iPhone 13 was released in the fall of 2021, it brought to the table some amazing upgrades and specs to the video capabilities in iPhone. It brought us ProRes codec quality inside of a small form factor, cinematic mode giving us that nice depth of field look, and macro mode making it super easy to get those macro looking video shots without having to have a shotgun length probe lens. On top of that, we got LiDAR and all the other features that the previous iPhones brought to the table. For the iPhone 13 Pro, you can expect to pay anywhere from $1,000 to about $1,500. The biggest reason a lot of video content creators use iPhones to film a lot of video is because of the convenience and the size. It brings to the table a camera that can produce 4K quality video that fits in your pocket, no accessories needed. Another feature that the iPhone brings that a lot of cinema cameras don't is autofocus. If you're using a Alexa Mini, a Blackmagic, or honestly any camera where you're using manual focus cinema lenses, you're not gonna have autofocus, so you have to have a separate person pulling that focus, or you have to do it by hand, by yourself, while framing a shot. It makes things really difficult. And the things that filmmakers really love about that is the ability to pull focus in post-production, which was mentioned in the Apple video. But also the fact that just the autofocus system in this camera is superb. I'd even say up on par with most Sony cameras. And speaking of being on par with most Sony cameras, the in-body stabilization in this camera is phenomenal. A lot of people don't even have to use a gimbal when shooting on this camera. You can just do it handheld and it is buttery smooth. Cinematic mode brings separation between what's in focus and what's not in focus. This is what we call depth. Similar to portrait mode, I noticed it can look a little fake in some lighting and proximity situations. Mostly if somebody's further away from the lens, or if it's in like a lower light situation, the separation between what's in focus and not in focus is like extremely sharp. There's like a definite transition between those two compared to most cine lenses where that separation is smooth and clean. I personally don't use cinematic mode very often, especially since it only shoots in 1080 up to 30 frames per second, and I really prefer the 4K coming out of the iPhone. I think until that software is improved through years of innovation, you're better off just using the regular lens and taking advantage of the proximity and the 1.5 aperture that the regular wide-angle lens provides. But I do think in some cases, cinematic mode could be useful. There's a noticeable difference between shooting in ProRes and the regular video codec that the iPhone provides, mostly between sharpness and compression. Curiously, the ProRes tends to have a little bit more noise in the shadows compared to the regular video codec. I assume this is due to the fact that the regular codec has some sort of post-processing noise reduction when the video is compressed onto the iPhone, giving it a much cleaner look, but also making it more sharper and high contrasted compared to the ProRes, which is a little more soft and tends to have a slightly more cinematic feel because it's not as compressed. If you have terabytes of storage ready to put those huge ProRes files, then there is a possibility you would have slightly more dynamic range in post-production to work with. But in my testing, it was minimal to none compared to the regular codec. So you're probably better off just using the H.265 codec and saving some storage space on your hard drive. So all those things are amazing reasons to use the iPhone over a cinema camera, but why would you use a cinema camera over an iPhone? I believe that there's a few points that come to the table when analyzing this question. Number one is the variety of lens selection. Using a cinema camera or a DSLR, you have the ability to change the lens system that you're using. So you could use a super crappy kit lens, or you could use something as high-end as a Cooke anamorphic lens that costs around $40,000. This variety of being able to change the lenses lets you experiment so much as a storyteller to really get the look that you want in order to tell the story that you've written. The next point, and I think this is the most important, is overall control of the image. With a smartphone, it can be really difficult to tone in the exact shutter speed, ISO, and aperture. It's all kind of done automatically inside the camera. And there are a few third-party apps that allow you to control those elements, but most of them are a little jittery and hard to use, And personally, I don't think they're 100% accurate. So having a cinema camera where you have control over all of those things brings worlds of opportunity to filmmakers alike. And the biggest reason for me that I like using cinema cameras over a smartphone is the fact that post-production is a lot smoother. I have to do a lot more things to an iPhone to make it very comparable to the Blackmagic, which I am coming out with a video where I'm comparing the footage of the Blackmagic to the iPhone, specifically in post-production workflow, but there was a lot that I had to do to really get it up to the same level that the Blackmagic was already at. So it kind of made my post-production color grading workflow twice as long. You may already know this, but there have been several feature films that have been released in theaters that were filmed on even the iPhone 7 Plus. So there's definitely going to be projects out there that will call for using a smartphone as their main camera, but I still think it's going to be a long time before filmmakers really generate that ability to just use a phone and never touch a cinema camera. But really, we're answering the question, is it enough? And I think yes, I think it is enough. You could shoot a feature film with the iPhone 13 Pro. In the end, story is key every time. When I first began doing videography, I got so caught up in the quality of the video that I was making, the lighting, how it was framed, all of those things, which are still very important elements. But in the end, I never asked the question, is this adding to the story that I'm trying to create? Now, while I've been in film school and over the past few years, I've really tried to ask that question, why is this adding to my story? Or does it even add to my story? And in reality, it doesn't matter what you use to tell the story, as long as it's a good story. So maybe instead of focusing on what camera you use to make that story, focus more on the lighting, the art design, the acting, the writing, even the audio quality can be much more important than the camera that you film with. There's a high likelihood that your audience won't tell a difference between an Arri Alexa LF and an iPhone 13 Pro if done correctly. And my ultimate goal of creating this YouTube channel is to help you become better storytellers. And if you feel like this video did, maybe think about subscribing and hitting that bell button so you never miss out on new young filmmaker content. Good luck filmmaking.